James Walker gripped the railing, his knuckles white against the cold steel. Below him, the Pacific churned, a dark mass of water hitting the hull with rhythmic, heavy thuds. He had been at sea for months, and the horizon had long since blurred into a single, unending line of gray. The air here was heavy with salt, clinging to his skin and stinging his eyes. Beneath his boots, the ship hummed a deep, constant vibration that traveled from the engines, through the deck plates, and into his marrow. It was a relentless, mechanical heartbeat that dictated every minute of his existence. He looked out at the vast, empty expanse. No land, no city lights, just the endless swell of the ocean and the crushing weight of silence between the waves. At 21, he had left the coast behind for this. He watched a massive spray of foam rise and vanish, repeating the cycle again and again. The ship moved forward, pushing through the dark water, carving a path through the solitude that had become his only constant companion. He let out a slow breath, feeling the spray hit his face, and watched the water churn until it vanished into the wake behind them. He left the deck as the shift ended, retreating from the open expanse into the narrow hallway below. His quarters were a 6x8 box of steel and static air, while his peers were currently docking in vibrant ports, draining their paychecks on luxury vehicles and extravagant vacations. James sat on the edge of his bunk. He flipped through the letters from home, reading about the fleeting thrills they chased. They were buying moments. He was buying time. He heard the muffled laughter of the crew through the bulkhead, a reminder of the common path he had deliberately stepped off. He did not crave the roar of a fast engine or the temporary escape of a crowded bar. Instead, he stared at the small, metal desk bolted to the floor. Every dollar he saved was a piece of his future, kept out of reach of the immediate gratification that consumed his friends. He pulled his ledger from the shelf. The silence in the room felt heavy, a stark contrast to the noise he imagined back on land. He tightened his grip on his pen, feeling the weight of the choice he was making. He was not just saving money. He was building a wall between his life and the drift of the world outside. He opened the book, the pages worn and soft under his thumb. The cabin light flickered, casting long, sharp shadows across the metal desk. He turned to a dog-eared chapter, his eyes scanning lines of text he had read before but never truly felt. Then he stopped. A single sentence sat on the page like a physical weight. Every major achievement begins with a definite purpose. James pulled his logbook closer. He turned to a fresh, empty page. For years, he had tracked the ship's coordinates with clinical precision, knowing exactly where he was on the map of the world. But his own life remained a blank space, drifting without a heading. He pressed the pen tip into the paper, the scratch of ink against fiber sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He wrote the words "financial independence before retirement" in bold, block letters. The ink bled slightly into the grain. He stared at the statement. It was no longer a vague ambition hovering in his mind. It was a fixed point, a destination plotted with ink. He traced the letters with his finger, the reality of the commitment settling into his hands. The uncertainty that had plagued him for months began to recede, replaced by the cold, clear logic of a plan. He finally had a bearing. The next morning, the ship docked in a bustling port. The air was thick with the scent of roasted coffee and exhaust. His crewmates were already shouting, gathering their gear for a night of excess, their voices echoing against the steel hull. They beat on his door, calling out for him to join the first round at the harbor bar. James stayed seated. He looked at his laptop, the screen illuminating his face in the dim cabin light. He opened his banking portal. The cursor blinked, a rhythmic pulse that felt like a heartbeat. He typed in the figures, his fingers pressing the keys with deliberate, measured force. He saw the balance of his savings account, a sum he would have normally burned through in a single weekend. He hesitated for a second, feeling the old urge to participate, to be one of the crowd. He closed his eyes, heard the fading footsteps of his crew moving toward the gangway, and clicked confirm. The money vanished from the account, moving into an investment vehicle. The transaction was instant. There was no fanfare, no cheering, just the quiet confirmation of a balance update. He stood up, walked to the porthole, and watched his friends disappear into the city lights. They were chasing the night. He was building his future. He closed the laptop, locked the cabin door, and felt the weight of his old habits finally slip away. Years blurred into a singular, rhythmic loop of horizons. The Pacific became a constant companion, its tides shifting as predictably as his own resolve. Every voyage now served a singular function: the funding cycle. He worked the engines, monitored the pressure gauges, and collected his pay, yet the money no longer felt like a reward for his labor. It was fuel. Before the ship could even finish its docking procedure in a new port, he had already calculated his contributions. The cabin became his office, his sanctuary from the noise of the shore. He watched the numbers climb, each entry in his ledger a brick in a wall he was building against the uncertainty of the future. The solitude that once felt like a cage now felt like a tool. He had no distractions, no social pulls, just the cold, hard data of his growing assets. He grew accustomed to the silence. He found peace in the steady, mechanical growth of his account. While others sought temporary escape in the ports they visited, James stayed aboard, refining his strategy, adjusting his contributions, and watching his wealth expand with every passing mile. The ocean was vast, but his focus was tighter than ever. He was no longer just a sailor. He was an architect of his own independence, one contract at a time. The ocean turned charcoal gray as the barometer plummeted. Waves smashed against the steel hull, each impact vibrating through the deck plates and deep into the ship's frame. James stood on the bridge, gripping the railing as the vessel pitched violently into the troughs. Beside him, the senior captain watched the radar with heavy, unblinking eyes. The screen showed a chaotic path of wind and water. The captain jabbed a finger toward the display. He shouted over the roar of the gale. "Ships rarely travel in straight lines, James. They make constant, small corrections to survive the drift." James watched the ship struggle against the current. He realized the truth held in those words. A ship did not reach its destination by brute force, but by 1,000 micro-adjustments against the chaos. He looked at his own financial ledger in his mind. The market was no different than this storm. It would toss, it would heave, and it would threaten to pull him off course. He felt the cold iron of the railing under his palms, his knuckles white with the strain. He understood then that his discipline was his rudder. As the storm intensified, shaking the very bones of the ship, James locked his focus. He would not fight the waves with panic. He would navigate them with the same small, relentless corrections the captain demanded. The news hit the ship via satellite feed like a sudden, violent squall. Stock values plummeted, erasing years of gains in a matter of hours. Across the mess hall, sailors stared at their screens, voices rising in frantic, jagged bursts. They talked of selling everything. They spoke of cutting their losses before the bottom fell out. James sat at the edge of the room, his coffee untouched, watching the red lines cascade downward. He felt the familiar, low-frequency hum of the engine beneath his feet, a steady rhythm that stood in direct opposition to the frantic energy in the room. His peers were drifting, reacting to the noise of the panic. James opened his laptop. The digital interface remained clean, indifferent to the chaos outside. He ignored the headlines screaming of catastrophe. He looked at his cash reserves, calculated the new entry points, and initiated the buy orders. His fingers moved with rhythmic, mechanical efficiency. He did not blink. He did not hesitate. He did not look for an exit. He viewed the market crash not as a disaster, but as a clearance sale on the future he was building. While the world panicked, he added to his position, steering his financial vessel directly into the heart of the storm, knowing that the drift was only for those who lacked a compass. Decades passed in a blur of horizons and salt. James treated his wealth like a vessel, steering it through turbulence with cold, mechanical discipline. When the economy faltered again, he ignored the noise and kept his monthly contributions steady. He did not look at the daily fluctuations. He looked at the horizon. The weight of his accumulated decisions began to exert a force of its own. It was a slow, heavy momentum that defied the gravity of market cycles. While others struggled to keep their heads above water, James moved with the steady, relentless pace of a deep-water freighter. He was no longer just saving. He was building a structure that could withstand any gale. Every paycheck, every surplus dollar, was another bolt tightened on the deck, another pound of ballast in the hold. The market tried to shake him, but he held his course. He watched the cycles of boom and bust roll beneath him like waves against a hull. He had become the captain of his own financial destiny, and the ship was finally too heavy to be pushed off course by the winds of panic. The path was set. The destination was no longer a question of if, but when. James stepped into his cabin, the door latch clicking shut behind him to seal out the wind. The room was quiet, save for the rhythmic pulse of the ship's generators vibrating through the bulkhead. He sat at the desk, opened the laptop, and waited for the screen to glow. His pulse remained slow. He navigated through the security protocols, fingers tapping the keys with the same cadence he used to log his daily ship coordinates. The browser loaded. He entered his credentials and clicked the final prompt. The screen refreshed. A 7-figure balance appeared in the center of the display. He stared at the digits. There was no sudden rush of adrenaline, no shout of triumph, only the cold, hard confirmation of a long-term equation. He looked at the history logs, scrolling back through years of small, incremental transfers. Each entry represented a choice, a skipped bar tab, a deferred luxury, a monthly contribution made in the middle of a storm. He leaned back into the chair, letting the data settle in his mind. The number was not a windfall. It was the physical weight of thousands of miles and thousands of decisions compiled into a single, undeniable reality. He had outlasted the waves, not by fighting them, but by simply refusing to stop. James pushed the laptop lid closed. The screen went dark, reflecting his own face in the dim light of the cabin. He stood up, the floor beneath him steady despite the swell outside. He walked to the hatch, turned the heavy iron wheel, and stepped back out into the night air. The wind hit him immediately, carrying the sharp scent of salt and distance. He walked to the railing and gripped the cold steel. Below, the water churned against the hull in a rhythmic, white-capped foam. He looked toward the horizon, where the black of the sky bled into the darker black of the ocean. The uncertainty that had defined his youth was gone. He had not conquered the sea, nor had he outrun it. He had simply learned to navigate it, mile by mile, decision by decision. The engine's hum vibrated through the deck plates into his boots, a familiar, grounding frequency. He shifted his weight, checked the horizon one last time, and let out a long, slow breath. The voyage was done. The course was clear. He stood alone in the dark, watching the water stretch out endlessly ahead, finally holding the freedom he had spent a lifetime securing.